As management chair for Celebrate 100, this has been a great year in Sault Ste. Marie. It's the 100th anniversary of the city's incorporation.
So the Sault Ste. Marie Canal opened in 1895, and it had a lot of engineering firsts. It was the longest lock in the world at that time, and it remained the longest lock until the Panama Canal was built in 1911. It was also the first lock in the world to operate using electricity. The original plans called for a hydraulically operated lock, but partway through construction, there were some experiments done on the St. Lawrence, locks on the St. Lawrence River, and they realized that they could operate with electricity. So partway through the construction, they changed their plans, and they built the lock to be operated electrically. And one of the most important buildings on site is the powerhouse, where the electricity was produced, and they used hydroelectricity to operate the valves, the interior and exterior lighting, and the gates of the lock. The lock began construction in 1889, and it took 6 years to complete. There was a workforce of over 800 men working on the project, 400 men working on excavating the canal prism. They actually cut St. Mary's Island in half to excavate the canal and then build the lock within the canal. There were 200 stonemasons who worked on site cutting and facing the stone, and another 200 men who worked in the quarries in southern Ontario and Manitoulin Island, where they were quarrying the limestone that they used in the project.
The Sault Ste. Marie Canal stands as an example of early Canadian technology and is a wonderful example of technology in transition. What happened in the last 100 years? We've got original machinery operating today from 1895 and the original concept of the lock. And today we have examples of the technology as recently as in the last 10 years. The introduction of hydraulics, the introduction of stop log technology that is incorporated and shows a transition in gate operating machinery, in lock filling valve machinery. What's really interesting also about the Sault Ste. Marie Canal is that the technology that was used in 1895 to fill and empty the lock are the same principles, even though some of the equipment is contemporary. We use the same principles for filling and emptying the lock as the original efficient design. And it is just as efficient in today's world as it was under its original concept.
The emergency swing dam was built in 1896. It was an integral part of the lock system. Just as its name suggests, it was used in case of an emergency, and it was designed to be used as a dam to block the flow of water coming from Lake Superior. There's a 6.4 meter drop between Lake Superior and Lake Huron in this area, and if ever there were damage to the lock gates, we need to have a safety mechanism in place in order to slow the flow of water down. So the one and only time that the emergency swing dam was used in an accident situation was on June 9th, 1909. It was in the afternoon. There were two boats passing from Lake Superior down into Lake Huron. The upper gates were open to admit the second boat into the lock chamber. And at the same time, a boat approached at the lower end of the lock coming from Lake Huron wanting to pass up into Lake Superior. This would not normally be a problem as long as the boat moored and waited its turn in the approach. But instead, there was some kind of a communication between the captain and the engineer, and the boat continued and ended up not being able to stop in time and hit the lower gates. And it pushed the lower south gate in enough to create a breach. And then once that happened, all that 6.4 meters of water, that difference just wants to flow. And so we ended up with a bit of a waterfall in the lock. And the force of the water swept away the gates, and there was nothing then to control that flow. The boats were swept out into the St. Mary's River as well. Luckily, there were no injuries. The boats needed to be repaired, and there was a lot of damage to the lock in the process. So the emergency swing dam was put into place. It took many hours, in fact several days, to actually get it into place, but once it was in place with the wickets and shutters down, it slowed the flow in the lock enough so that they could close an auxiliary set of gates. And then within 12 days, they had everything repaired and ready to go again. At that time, the lock was extremely busy, so it was necessary for them to repair quickly.
Earlier models of the swing dam were basically wood structures. The swing dam at the Sault Ste. Marie Canal is mostly steel and with steel wickets, which was successfully operated in 1909, which is also a first because it's the only dam that has ever been used in an emergency circumstance and deployed successfully. That was heralded at the time as a major achievement. As a result of that, that model was used at the Panama Canal. The emergency swing dam at the Sault Ste. Marie Canal is the last remaining of its type in the world.
The Sault Ste. Marie Canal is a great place to come and learn about technology. We do a lot of educational tours here for school groups. A wonderful place to learn about pulleys and gears and structures because the children can see the real thing in action. As far as a community gathering place, the Sault Ste. Marie Canal and the lock has been an integral part of the community since its inception, since its beginning, really. People used to gather here in the 20s to watch the passenger boats come through and have picnics. And it's still a place where people come for picnics and to walk their dogs and enjoy the beautiful grounds here at the canal.
This facility was built between 1979 and 1982. Actually, the grand opening was in early 1983, but the history of the site goes much further back. It was actually in 1888 that some locals recognized that the water power in the St. Mary's Rapids could be turned into electricity. So they undertook to build a generating station back in 1888. And they worked on that up until about 1894. And the interesting point about that is as they progressed in the construction, they started to run out of money, so they decided that they didn't need any technical expertise to assist them, so I guess they got rid of the engineering support that they had. And they finished construction of the original canal in 1894, and then when they flooded it with water for the first time, it collapsed. So perhaps they did need a bit of that technical expertise that they chose not to use. So it was around that time in 1894 that Francis Clerc showed up in the Sault Ste. Marie area, and he had a great vision for developing industry in the area: steel, paper, railroads, electric power. So he became involved with this site, and by 1899 he had a working generating station here on the site and was supplying electricity to light the homes of Sault Ste. Marie. And that continued throughout the early 1900s. And then around 1916, a new facility was built on this site, and it was the one that remained here up until this current facility was built in 1979. Now, just to put it in perspective, the old Sioux plant that we call it, that was here in 1916, it had 28